imagine you are trying to learn a new language.
Right, which is usually a pretty terrifying thought for most adults.
Oh, totally. It feels like you're standing at the bottom of a massive mountain and you're starting at absolute zero, you know?
Yeah, like you don't even have the basic tools to start climbing.
Exactly. But what if I told you that you actually have this secret bank account sitting right there in your brain, and it is already filled with thousands of words you didn't even know you owned?
It completely flips the traditional script on language learning.
Yeah.
I mean, when you realize those linguistic assets are literally already in your account, ready to go, that psychological barrier to entry just kind of collapses.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today's deep dive is based on some genuinely fascinating data from a platform called Habla.
Yeah, the data they've compiled is just incredible.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore the hidden math of language, specifically this massive, almost unbelievable overlap between English and Spanish.
Right, and more importantly, how you can strategically use this data to basically hack your way to fluency much faster.
Because it's less like building a house from scratch and more like walking onto a construction site and realizing the foundation is already perfectly poured.
That's a great way to put it. The foundation is absolutely there. It's built on this shared linguistic architecture. But to really leverage this, we have to grasp the sheer scale of the overlap first.
Right. We have to actually look at the balance in that secret bank account.
Exactly. So when linguists look at this, they generally agree that there are between 10,000 and 20,000 shared cognates between English and Spanish.
Wait, up to 20,000 words?
Yeah, up to 20,000. And just as a quick refresher, a cognate is simply a word that shares the same linguistic ancestry as another.
So they look similar, sound similar, and mean the same thing.
Spot on.
I mean, 20,000 is a staggering amount of vocabulary to just get for free. How much of the actual dictionary does that cover?
Well, to put a metric on it, roughly 30 to 40% of all the words in a standard English dictionary have a direct Spanish relative.
30 to 40%, that's almost half the language.
It is. But the distribution is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at everyday, casual, conversational English, the overlap is kind of scattered.
Right.
But if you step into highly educated fields, like science, medicines, law, academia,
The technical stuff.
yeah, the technical domains, in those fields, that 30 to 40% average completely skyrockets. It hits nearly 90% overlap.
90%. So if I'm reading a medical journal, I'm practically reading a Spanish document already.
Basically, yes.
Got
The
it.
vocabulary is almost identical.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because that brings up a huge contradiction for me.
Oh.
Yeah, like, if I already know up to 20,000 words, and I share 90% of my medical vocabulary with a native Spanish speaker, why does day one of a beginner Spanish class still feel so incredibly brutal?
That is the classic question.
Right, like, if I have this massive bank account of high-level words, why do I feel entirely broke when I'm just trying to ask someone where the bathroom is, or, ordering a coffee in Madrid?
It's frustrating, I know. But to solve that contradiction, we actually have to look backward. It's a question of historical DNA.
Okay, history time.
Yeah, we have to understand why we share all these advanced, multisyllabic scientific terms, but we completely freeze up when we try to say something as basic as water or house.
Well, I mean, technically speaking, English and Spanish belong to entirely different language family trees, right?
They do.
Like, English is a Germanic language. It's heavily tied to Dutch and German, while Spanish is a Romance language, which means it evolved directly from Latin.
Right.
So they shouldn't realistically have a 40% overlap.
No, they absolutely shouldn't. And, well, for a long time they didn't. English's foundational everyday words, things like water, eat, sleep, house, dog, those are firmly rooted in its Germanic origins.
So what happened?
That linguistic isolation ended violently in the year 1066.
Ah, the Norman Conquest.
Exactly. William the Conqueror crossed the English Channel, won the Battle of Hastings, and essentially rewired the entire English language.
So this wasn't just, like, a change in leadership. This was a forced injection of a completely different vocabulary.
A massive injection. The Normans spoke a dialect of Old French, and French, just like Spanish, is a direct child of Latin.
Okay, so they brought Latin to the island.
Right, and they didn't just take over the throne, they replaced the entire ruling apparatus, the government, the courts of law, the church, the schools.
Oh, wow, so all the institutions.
All of them. So practically overnight, you had this massive socioeconomic divide that was strictly defined by language.
Meaning the rich spoke one language and the poor spoke another.
Exactly. The ruling class, the royals, judges, academics, they were conducting all their high-level business in French. But the common people, the farmers and laborers who were actually working the land, they were still speaking Old English.
Oh, this perfectly explains that weird quirk in English where we have completely different words for an animal and, like, the meat it produces.
Yes, the classic textbook example.
Right, because the English peasants out in the mud were raising cows and swine and sheep, which are all these rough Germanic words.
Yep.
But the French nobility, sitting up in the castle dining halls, they were eating beef and pork and mutton.
Which are elegant, Latin-derived French words.
That is so crazy.
It is. And over centuries of forced cohabitation, these two languages essentially bled into each other. They merged into what we now know as modern English.
So what's the final ratio today?
The end result is that approximately 58% of the English language we use today is actually derived from Latin or French. The Normans basically forced a massive Latin software update onto a Germanic operating system.
I love that visual. So English isn't just one language, it's practically 3 toddlers in a trench coat. It's a Germanic language wearing a French disguise, standing on top of a Latin dictionary.
That is a highly accurate, if slightly ridiculous way to put it.
Yes, and that directly answers my pushback about why beginner Spanish is so difficult, doesn't it?
It does, because the vocabulary you learn in Spanish 101, the equivalents for house, dog, water, brother, those map directly to your Germanic English words.
Right, there's no historical overlap there.
Exactly. You don't get to tap into your shared Latin vocabulary until you advance past the beginner stage. You have to start talking about residences, canines, precipitation, or siblings.
Because the high-level professional words are where the Latin roots actually live.
Precisely.
Okay, so history perfectly explains the mechanism of why this overlap exists, but I'm curious about how modern researchers actually find and quantify this.
You mean the actual counting?
Yeah, I mean, nobody is sitting at a desk with an English dictionary and a Spanish dictionary cross-referencing 20,000 words with a yellow highlighter. There has to be a modern toolkit for this.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
We rely almost entirely on computational algorithms today. The overarching framework researchers use is called computational etymological mapping.
Which sounds incredibly complicated. Is it basically just running a massive find and replace script across digital databases?
That's the baseline of it, yeah. The databases track the chronological ancestry of words, but it goes a lot deeper than just flagging a shared root.
How so?
Well, the algorithm maps historical sound loss. For instance, the software knows that a hard P sound in Latin often softened into a B sound in Spanish over a few centuries.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it tracks those specific phonetic shifts across thousands of documents to confidently flag words that share the exact same genetic DNA.
Okay, but just because a computer knows 2 words share a great-great-grandfather from the year 1200, that doesn't mean I'm going to actually recognize the word when I see it on a menu, right?
Right, recognition is a different hurdle.
So how do researchers filter out the historical trivia from the words that are actually functional for a human being in the real world?
That is the crux of the problem. To isolate the functionally useful words, researchers run those historically linked words through a very specific algorithm called the Levenshtein distance.
The Levenshtein distance. I think I've heard of this in computer science. Is this basically the same math my smartphone uses for autocorrect?
That is the exact same underlying mathematics, yes.
Like when I fat finger a text message and misspell a word by 1 letter, the algorithm calculates the closest real word based on the minimal number of keystroke changes.
Exactly. The Levenshtein distance calculates orthographic similarity. So it basically counts the absolute minimum number of single character edits required to transform one string of text into another.
Okay.
And an edit is strictly defined as adding a letter, deleting a letter, or substituting a letter.
Got it. So if we take the English word actor, A-C-T-O-R. In Spanish, it's identical, A-C-T-O-R.
Right.
So the algorithm requires 0 edits to translate that string of text. That would be a Levenshtein distance of 0.
A perfect match. Distance 0. And a distance of 1 is functionally just as useful for a learner.
Give me an example.
Take the English word president and compare it to the Spanish presidente. The computer only has to add 1 single letter at the end, the E. That is a Levenshtein distance of 1.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for a computer. But from a cognitive standpoint, for the listener, If a word is a distance of 1, does the human brain actually recognize it instantly?
It does, yes.
Or does the brain still stumble over that one single letter difference in real-time conversation? Like, if I'm reading a Spanish news article and I see presidente, my brain doesn't stop, fire up a translation matrix, strip away the E, and then translate it to president, right?
No, not at all. Because the human brain is a highly evolved pattern recognition engine, where these low-distance words, especially in reading comprehension, your brain bypasses that conscious, deliberate translation process entirely.
Wow.
Yeah, the structural scaffolding of a concept is already so deeply embedded in your mind that you extract the semantic meaning instantaneously.
I just absorb it as a known entity.
Exactly. Now, spoken conversation requires a bit more active processing, just to adjust for accents and vowel pronunciations. But the cognitive load is still incredibly light compared to learning a genuinely foreign word from scratch.
Right, and understanding how this computational mapping calculates word distances is where we find the real leverage.
This is the best part.
Because if the algorithms are identifying these massive, highly predictable patterns, we can actually reverse engineer those algorithms into practical cheat codes.
Yes, you can multiply your vocabulary instantly. You don't have to just hope you stumble across a cognate. You can actively construct them.
Right, you entirely bypass rote memorization by learning the phonetic rules.
Exactly.
So let's get into the specific cheat codes from the Se Habla data. Because analyzing word endings, the suffixes, reveals these rules. If you know how a Latin-derived English word ends, you can predict its Spanish counterpart with shocking accuracy.
It's almost like a magic trick.
It really is. The first major one is words ending in tion, nation, action, condition. In Spanish, that suffix transforms to cion with an accent on the O.
Right.
So nation, action, condition.
And that one single rule unlocks over 1,000 words instantly.
Over 1,000.
Yeah. But it's important to understand why this happens. It's not arbitrary at all. It comes down to phonetic efficiency.
Like how the physical mouth moves.
Exactly. Over centuries, the sharp, hard T sound in those Latin words required just a bit too much muscular effort to pronounce quickly in everyday speech.
Oh, I see.
So as the language evolved on the Iberian Peninsula, that hard T relaxed. It softened into an S or a soft C sound. Basically, your mouth just does less work.
That makes so much sense. Language always evolves toward the path of least physical resistance.
Always.
Okay, the next massive pattern is words ending in ty, liberty, university, capacity.
Right.
In Spanish, that usually becomes dad. Libertad, universidad, capacidad. That is another 500 words right there.
And again, it's that phonetic softening.
Yeah, the T dropping to a D is just the vocal cords vibrating slightly differently while the tongue is in the exact same spot behind the teeth, right?
That is exactly the mechanism. It's just a vocalization shift.
Yeah.
And then you have words ending in ment, which become miento.
Right, so movement transforms to movimiento.
Or monument becomes monumento. That is 300 more words.
Incredible.
And words ending in ist become ISTA. Artist is artista. Dentist is dentista. That's another 200 words seamlessly added to your vocabulary.
And because we're dealing with the broad Romance language family tree, these phonetic shifts aren't just an English to Spanish trick, are they?
No, not at all. If you understand these evolutionary mechanics, you start seeing the exact same patterns across French, Italian, and Portuguese.
So what does this all mean?
Well, it means you're acquiring a foundational linguistic key. But I really want to emphasize a core belief from cognitive science here.
Okay, lay it on us.
Many adult learners harbor this weird guilt about using these patterns. They feel that if they aren't painfully memorizing flashcards, they aren't, really learning the language.
Oh yeah, they view cognates as a crutch. Or like they're cheating.
Exactly. It's that old mentality that if it doesn't hurt, it's not real education.
Which is crazy.
It's cognitively backwards. Utilizing cognates is a highly recommended optimal strategy. Your brain's working memory, its processing power, or its RAM is strictly limited.
Right.
So when you utilize shared vocabulary, you drastically reduce your cognitive load. It frees up your mental RAM to focus intensely on the elements of the language that are genuinely different and complex.
Right, verb conjugations, gendered nouns, and entirely new sentence structure.
Exactly. You save your energy for the hard stuff.
So by memorizing 4 simple suffix rules, you don't just gain 2,000 words, you buy back the brain power you actually need.
Exactly.
But I think we need to do a reality check here.
Fair enough.
Because if the cheat codes are this simple and reliable, and the underlying math is this clear, why do different linguists report conflicting numbers on the total cognates?
Ah, yes. The great debate.
Right, like, if you search for the total number of Spanish cognates, some sources say 10,000, others swear it's closer to 25,000. Why does that metric fluctuate so wildly? We don't want to map out all these hacks without pointing out the linguistic traps along the way.
That's a very fair point. The fluctuation mainly exists because the criteria for what actually counts as a functional cognate changes depending on who is designing the algorithm.
Okay.
The biggest debate centers on the difference between transparent cognates and opaque cognates.
Well, transparent cognates being the ones we just discussed, right? Hospital to hospital or actor to actor.
Right. 0 or 1 Liechtenstein distance, instantly recognizable by a human.
Right. But what is an opaque cognate then?
An opaque cognate is a word that shares the exact same historical Latin root, but has evolved so radically over the last 1,000 years that a beginner would never ever guess they were related.
Oh, interesting. Like what? Give me an example of an opaque connection.
Okay, take the English word night and the Spanish word noche.
Night and noche.
Etymologically, they descend from the exact same ancient root. So a computer mapping their DNA will absolutely flag them as a shared cognate.
But for a beginner standing in a coffee shop in a foreign country, knowing they're historically related doesn't help them communicate in that moment at all.
Exactly. They look and sound entirely different.
Right, but wait. If we apply what we just learned about those phonetic shifts, opaque cognates aren't entirely useless, are they?
How do you mean?
Well, if I know that the harsh Germanic GHT sound in English often translates to the softer CH sound in Romance languages like 8 becoming ocho or night becoming noche, then opaque cognates actually become a sort of skeleton key for intermediate and advanced learners.
Oh, wow. That is a phenomenal insight, yes.
Once you learn the deeper evolutionary patterns, you can start decoding words that look completely different on the surface.
That's exactly right. They are a stumbling block for beginners, which is why some linguists exclude them from the total count. But they are incredibly powerful tools for advanced fluency, which is why other linguists include them.
Okay, that explains the numbers fluctuating.
Yeah, and the second major factor driving those fluctuating numbers is the frequency of use. There is a vast disparity between counting the total words in a physical dictionary versus counting the words actually utilized in everyday human interaction.
Ah, we touched on this with the Norman Conquest, the peasant language versus the royal language.
Exactly. If you isolate the 2,000 most common words used in daily life, buying groceries, asking for directions, basic greetings cognates only make up about 10 to 15% of that subset.
So that perfectly explains the beginner's plateau at the coffee shop.
It does. But once you break through that initial barrier of daily survival vocabulary, your capabilities suddenly hockey sticks upward.
Because you finally reach the professional Latin-based vocabulary that you've implicitly known your entire life.
Exactly. The training wheels come off and you can just fly.
That's awesome. But while we're talking about the pitfalls, we absolutely have to discuss the false friends, the false cognates.
Oh, the booby traps, yes.
Right, because if I'm confidently swapping suffixes and leaning on my Latin roots, aren't I eventually going to accidentally invent a word that doesn't exist? Or worse, confidently use a word that means something entirely different?
False friends are absolutely crucial to identify. These are words that look remarkably similar in both languages.
Yeah.
They seem like obvious, transparent cognates, but they have evolved to hold entirely different meanings.
The classic example in the Se Habla research is the Spanish word asister.
Yes, this story.
I look at that, my brain calculates a Levenstein distance of 1, and I immediately assume it means to assist or to help.
But in Spanish, asister means to attend, as in attending a meeting or a university class.
How does that even happen? How do two languages start with the exact same root and end up in totally different places?
It's an evolutionary divergence.
It feels like convergent evolution in biology, you know? Like how a shark and a dolphin have the exact same torpedo-shaped body because of their environment, but one is a fish and the other is a mammal. They look identical, but structurally, they're completely different beasts.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it.
Yeah.
Two words start from the exact same Latin root. One gets culturally isolated on the Iberian Peninsula, while the other is dragged across the English Channel by the Normans and mixes with Germanic tribes.
Right.
Over centuries of entirely different cultural pressures, the English word narrows to mean providing help, while the Spanish word narrows to mean being present. They look identical on the surface, but their evolutionary journey gave them different structural meanings.
It's literally like stepping on a landmine in a professional setting. You're feeling invincible with your suffixes, and suddenly you tell your Spanish colleagues you want to help a meeting instead of attend it.
Yep. Or worse, the classic blunder with the word embarazada.
Oh, no.
An English speaker naturally assumes it means embarrassed, but it actually means pregnant.
Oh, man. Yeah, that is definitely an evolutionary divergence you want to be acutely aware of before you speak.
Very much so. But the vital context here is proportion.
Okay.
When linguists calculate the true overlap between the languages, they subtract these false cognates. And it turns out they account for less than 1% of the total shared vocabulary.
Less than 1%.
Yeah, they are rare exceptions. You just learn the handful of common ones, and then you can confidently trust the other 99%.
That's incredibly reassuring. I mean, we've covered a massive amount of ground here today. We started with 11th century conquerors violently reshaping a language. We moved into modern computational algorithms tracking phonetic softening over centuries, and we broke down the biological evolution of false friends.
Good lot to take in.
It is. So how do we pull all these threads together into a unified takeaway for the listener?
The overarching synthesis here is really a profound shift in your cognitive framework. Knowing that there are up to 20,000 shared cognates sitting there, fully formed in your memory, well, it should provide a massive structural confidence boost.
You aren't stepping into the dark unknown.
Exactly. The heavy lifting of the conceptual architecture is already done for you. You just need to learn the slight phonetic variations and how these familiar concepts present themselves.
So, to you, the listener, the next time you look at a menu or a newspaper or a textbook in Spanish, completely flip your default mindset. Don't scan the page anxiously looking for the words you don't know.
Right.
Scan the text, specifically looking for the 30 to 40% that you inherently understand. Apply those suffix transformations. Look for the shared historical DNA.
It transforms language learning from a task of brutal memorization into a process of joyful recognition.
It really does. And it leaves me with one final kind of lingering thought. I want you to mull this over after we wrap up today. We just spent all this time tracing how we share thousands upon thousands of words across an ocean and across entirely different language family trees simply because human history collided centuries ago.
Right.
It makes you wonder, how much of what we consider to be completely foreign or alien when we look at other cultures is actually just our very own shared human history, wearing a slightly different disguise?
That is a beautiful and deeply resonant perspective to end on.
The secret bank account has always been there. Now you just know how to make a withdrawal. Keep looking for those old friends.